What if the most dangerous threat to an empire was not a foreign invader, but its own beating heart? Deep in the jungles of Mesoamerica, long before European sails touched the shores of the New World, a magnificent civilization flourished, complex, advanced, and deeply spiritual. The Maya, known for their towering step pyramids, intricate calendars, and precise astronomy, were also warriors. Their cities were not united under one flag, but scattered across regions, each a kingdom unto itself, ruled by dynasties that believed their power was divinely ordained. Yet behind this sacred facade lay a history riddled with ambition, bloodshed, and betrayal. The fall of the Maya was not a single event, but a chain reaction set off by internal conflict. The great wars that erupted among them, city against city, brother against brother, tore at the soul of their civilization and shattered the very foundation that had elevated them to greatness. At the height of their power, the Maya controlled vast territories from the Yucatan Peninsula to present-day Guatemala, Honduras, and parts of El Salvador. Their cities, Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, Palenque, were architectural wonders, often compared in grandeur to ancient Rome or Egypt. But unlike those centralized empires, Maya political structure was fragmented. Each city-state, or Ajuil, had its own ruler, its own gods, and its own agenda. While this decentralization allowed for cultural diversity and innovation, it also sowed the seeds of mistrust and rivalry. Wars among Maya city-states were not rare. They were a persistent reality. Initially, they were ceremonial or strategic, designed to capture prisoners for sacrifice or to settle disputes over trade routes and agricultural land. But over time, these skirmishes evolved into devastating full-scale wars that drained resources, shattered alliances, and destabilized the region. One of the most infamous rivalries was between Tikal and Calakmul, two superpowers locked in an ancient Cold War that eventually turned hot. Tikal, located in what is now northern Guatemala, was an intellectual and spiritual center, revered for its art and monuments. Calakmul, hidden in the dense forests of southern Mexico, was equally grand and far more militaristic. Their rivalry spanned generations and was marked by shifting alliances with smaller city-states, espionage, assassination, and outright warfare. This dynamic fractured the Maya political world into factions, constantly undermining any attempt at unity. The Maya wars were not merely battles for land, they were ideological conflicts, personal vendettas, and struggles for legitimacy wrapped in the language of divine right. And as the blood flowed, so did the trust that once bound the Maya world together. The Maya elite believed in sacred kingship, where rulers were considered intermediaries between gods and people. Warfare was thus not only a political necessity, but also a divine obligation. Defeating an enemy wasn't just about conquest, it was a spiritual triumph. Kings would often record their victories on stone stelae, glorifying their divine favor and shaming their enemies. Yet, this obsession with legitimacy and divine endorsement only intensified the violence. As city-states sought to outdo each other in displays of power, the wars grew more intense and frequent. The captives taken in these wars, often nobles and royals, were paraded, tortured, or sacrificed in elaborate rituals believed to ensure cosmic balance. But ironically, as the Maya tried to preserve cosmic order through war, they invited chaos into their own world. In this toxic atmosphere, betrayal became a currency. Marriage alliances, once seen as sacred bonds, turned into tools of manipulation and control. Rulers would marry daughters into rival dynasties, only to later turn on their in-laws when the political winds shifted. Espionage was rampant, and shifting loyalties were common. One of the most tragic examples comes from the city of Copan, where Kaak Yipyaj Chan Kawil was betrayed by his own kin, ushering in a period of instability and decline. In Palenque, dynastic disputes and attacks from rival city-states forced periods of exile and re-establishment. These internal fractures weakened the cities just as external pressures began to rise. As war consumed the Maya world, their cities, once vibrant centers of knowledge and worship, became ghostly battlegrounds. Great temples lay unfinished, roads became unsafe, and agricultural systems collapsed due to neglect or sabotage. The peasantry, overtaxed and underprotected, began to abandon the cities for rural areas or rebel against their lords. Droughts and ecological strain only accelerated this process, but it was the endless cycle of war and betrayal that had already primed the empire for collapse. What was once a golden age of astronomy, mathematics, and divine rule began to wither under the weight of human greed and pride. Still, the Maya story doesn't end in absolute ruin. While many great cities fell into silence and decay by the end of the 9th century, others endured, reinvented, relocated, or absorbed into new political structures. The arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century would deliver the final blow to what little remained of Maya political autonomy. But the people themselves survived. Their descendants still live across Mexico and Central America, preserving languages, traditions, and fragments of the old world. And through their stories, we begin to understand not just how empires fall, but how people endure. The Maya Wars were a crucible, an intense fire that tested the strength of a civilization. In the end, it was not the blade of the Spanish sword that first broke the Maya. It was their own. In their striving for power, in their divine ambition and deadly betrayal, they destroyed what they sought to protect, their world. But perhaps this is the universal tale of empires, not destroyed by enemies, but by the cracks that form within. Tell us in the comments, if the Maya had united, do you believe they could have resisted the tide of history? And what empire do you think echoes the Maya's fate today? Stay with us as we dive deeper into the bloodlines, betrayals, and battles that tore the Maya world apart. To understand how betrayal shattered the Maya world, we must first look into the very structure of their power. Unlike empires where a central authority dictated the rules, the Maya political landscape was a fractured web of noble families and rival kingdoms. Each king was not merely a political leader, but a sacred figure, his lineage tied directly to the gods. But this spiritual power also made them dangerously ambitious. Every new ruler had to prove his legitimacy through grand monuments, successful warfare, and cosmic rituals. Failure meant not just political defeat, but divine disgrace. Thus, power among the Maya became a desperate and unending struggle for divine approval, and that desperation bred treachery. Take the story of Tikal and Calakmul, two of the most powerful city-states in the Maya world. Their rivalry was not just military, it was existential. For centuries, both fought for dominance over the Petén Basin and its surrounding trade networks. Tikal, known for its towering pyramids and intellectual influence, saw itself as the rightful spiritual heir of the gods. Calakmul, its shadowy nemesis buried deep in the jungle, believed otherwise. At the heart of this Cold War was a constant cycle of alliances, betrayals, and proxy battles. Smaller city-states like Dos Pilas, Naranjo, and Caracol were often pulled into this struggle, forced to choose a side, and often switching sides when the winds of power changed. In 562 AD, Calakmul struck a brutal blow to Tikal by helping a rebellious faction within the city. The result was Tikal's defeat, and a 130-year silence in its inscriptions, a hiatus that scholars now interpret as a time of internal chaos and subjugation. Tikal's kings vanished from records, monuments stopped being erected, and its influence collapsed. Calakmul, through indirect control, created a network of client states and allies. But peace was never the goal. Domination was. Eventually, Tikal would recover under Jasau Chan Kaawil Wurmers, launching a surprise attack on Calakmul in 695 AD and achieving a stunning victory. Yet even this resurgence could not reverse the tide. Every battle drained lives, resources, and trust, and the Maya world became a cauldron of shifting loyalties and relentless warfare. But the story of betrayal was not limited to kings and cities. It seeped into families. The dynastic system of inheritance was deeply flawed, often leading to succession crises that sparked civil war. Sons turned against fathers, brothers killed brothers, and queens sometimes ruled from the shadows, manipulating outcomes to protect their bloodlines. In Yachilan, Lady Kabal Shuk, the wife of Itzamnaj Balam II, played a crucial political role, appearing on monuments as a central figure in rituals. While revered, such influence also caused tension. Powerful royal women often became targets of court intrigue, accused of witchcraft, or quietly removed from history. Internal distrust didn't just weaken cities, it turned thrones into traps. These family betrayals had national consequences. A city divided by internal strife became an easy target for rival states. The best-known example is Dos Pilas, originally a breakaway faction of Tikal. Its ruler, Bialaj Chan Kawil, was exiled from Tikal in a political dispute. Instead of disappearing, he allied with Calakmul, became a vassal king, and used his new position to wage war on his own birthplace. The irony is painful. A son of Tikal became its greatest destroyer. This cycle of vengeance, personal and political, erased entire dynasties, destabilized regions, and led to the fall of once mighty cities. Warfare also underwent a grim transformation during this era. Earlier Maya conflicts were often ritualistic, focused on capturing elite prisoners for sacrifice. But as the wars escalated, tactics became more brutal. Cities were razed. Populations were massacred or displaced. Economies were decimated. Agricultural terraces and irrigation systems, meticulously built over generations, were abandoned or destroyed. The Maya heartland began to empty as refugees fled into the jungle or migrated to less contested regions. With fewer people to support the elite class through labor and tribute, the economic base collapsed. The noble class, once gods among men, became desperate despots, clinging to fading power. One of the most devastating effects of the Maya wars was on religion itself. Religion had long been the glue that held Maya society together. But war eroded faith. When kings failed in battle, it was seen not just as a strategic defeat, but a sign that the gods had turned against them. Temples were abandoned. Priests lost authority. Cosmic rituals that once united people in shared belief now became hollow spectacles, tainted by blood and betrayal. The spiritual heart of the Maya began to darken. Meanwhile, in the background of all this chaos, nature began to turn its back on the Maya. Severe droughts in the 8th and 9th centuries made agriculture nearly impossible in some regions. Crops failed, water reserves dried up, and famines broke out. But these natural disasters didn't strike a stable society. They struck one already teetering from war and mistrust. The inability of the elite to respond effectively only worsened the situation. In many cities, uprisings began. The common people, once loyal subjects, turned against their rulers, burned temples, and fled en masse. Some scholars believe that the collapse of the classic Maya cities was not a sudden apocalypse, but a quiet rebellion of the people walking away. And in this silence, the jungle returned. Great stone cities were swallowed by vines and trees. Roof combs that once scraped the heavens fell to ruin. Glyphs that told of divine bloodlines and heavenly wars crumbled into dust. The Maya wars had not just broken an empire, they had broken its soul. In the Maya world, war was not only a political necessity, it was sacred. The gods demanded blood, and kings, seen as the chosen vessels of divine will, were the ones who delivered it. Religion and warfare were inseparably entwined, each fueling the other in a cycle of devotion and destruction. The battlefield was a stage, and the sky itself a watching audience. Each act of violence was not just strategy, it was ceremony. To defeat an enemy was to demonstrate the favor of the gods. To lose was to risk spiritual disgrace. And so, as cities waged war and betrayal spread like wildfire, the gods became tools in the hands of men, invoked not for peace, but for power. Maya religion was deeply cosmological. They believed the universe had multiple layers: the heavens above, the middle world of humans, and the underworld, Xibalba, below. Every war, every ritual, was part of a cosmic drama playing out between these realms. Kings claimed divine right by performing bloodletting rituals, offering their own bodies to the gods to open sacred portals between worlds. Victory in war further reinforced their spiritual credentials, serving as proof that they were chosen. This gave Maya rulers an immense burden to keep the cosmos in balance. But as war intensified, these rituals became more frequent, more desperate, more brutal. At the heart of these sacred wars were the gods of conflict and death: Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, and Camazotz, the bat god of sacrifice, loomed over battlefields in fearsome form. Itzamna, god of the heavens, and Cha'ak, the god of rain, were called upon before battles to grant favor. The jaguar, symbol of both nobility and war, appeared everywhere, on shields, temple carvings, and royal attire. The king often dressed as the god Ka'awil, holding a serpent scepter that breathed fire and divine lightning. Warfare was a performance in which gods were evoked, channeled, and even impersonated. The line between man and deity blurred in the roar of war. The capture of enemies, especially rival nobles or royalty, was the most prized objective in Maya warfare. These captives were not just political prisoners, they were sacred offerings. Upon capture, they were often paraded publicly, humiliated, and later sacrificed in elaborate ceremonies meant to honor the gods and ensure cosmic balance. One of the most dramatic examples of this comes from Bonampak, where murals vividly depict the ritual bloodletting, music, and dance surrounding such sacrifices. These ceremonies were not hidden or secretive. They were public affirmations of divine justice and royal supremacy. But this sacred view of war created a terrifying pressure. Kings had to deliver not just victories, but trophies. Failed military campaigns could mean not only loss of prestige, but questions about a ruler's divine legitimacy. The result was a never-ending escalation of violence. The desire for captives, not land, often drove kings to overextend their forces, attack stronger neighbors, and engage in risky gambles. The gods had to be fed, no matter the cost. In time, even the sacred became corrupted. Some rulers began sacrificing not captured enemies, but their own people, orphans, servants, or even family members, when victories were scarce. Blood was demanded, and blood would be given. Yet the belief in divine kingship, once a unifying force, began to unravel. As warfare grew more chaotic and rulers became more despotic, the public's faith eroded. Inscriptions became more desperate, boasting of victories that never occurred, or rewriting history to preserve a dynasty's honor. Rituals once performed to honor the gods became political theater, detached from true devotion. The temples still rose, but their foundations were cracked. The cosmos, once balanced through sacrifice and ceremony, began to teeter. This spiritual crisis bled into architecture and art. Temples, once harmonious and elegantly designed, became increasingly massive and brutal in scale, monuments to fear rather than faith. Hieroglyphs became more rigid, their lines tight and angry. The stories they told were no longer of creation and harmony, but of war and wrath. Even burial practices changed. Elite tombs, once placed beneath temple pyramids in sacred alignment with celestial events, began to show signs of hasty construction, looting, or even desecration. The dead no longer rested in cosmic peace. They were casualties of ambition. Meanwhile, a new force was emerging within the Maya world. Not a city or army, but an idea: resistance. Among the common people, disillusionment grew. Why sacrifice for kings who brought only war? Why pray to gods who answered only with drought and death? In many regions, particularly in the southern lowlands, the population began to fragment. Rural communities detached themselves from central authority. Markets collapsed. Trade routes were abandoned. It was not a violent revolution. It was a quiet refusal. People simply stopped believing. They stopped building temples. They stopped following kings. The divine order, so carefully constructed over centuries, was undone not by enemies, but by doubt. This unraveling of belief also led to the collapse of knowledge. Maya writing, one of the most sophisticated writing systems in the ancient world, began to disappear. Fewer inscriptions were carved. Fewer records were kept. Astronomy, once used to time rituals and predict celestial events, became less precise. Calendars fell out of sync. The long count calendar, which had guided generations of rulers, stopped being recorded in many places. The priests, once keepers of time and fate, lost their audience. Still, it would be wrong to paint the Maya decline as total darkness. Even in the midst of war and spiritual decay, there were pockets of brilliance. Cities like Chichen Itza in the north and Uxmal managed to thrive for centuries beyond the collapse of the southern cities. These centers adapted, militarily, politically, and spiritually. They adopted new gods, embraced new architectural styles, and created hybrid forms of governance that blended the sacred and the practical. But even these innovations could not reverse the long-term decline. The cycle had already begun. The wars had fractured the soul of the empire. In time, the Maya gods themselves began to change. They became darker, more vengeful, more distant. The once playful tricksters and wise sky deities were replaced by skeletal lords and monstrous spirits of the underworld. In murals and pottery, the gods no longer smiled, they devoured. The cosmic order, once sustained by offerings, was now a battlefield of its own, and the kings, once gods among men, were now little more than warlords, grasping for power in a dying world. As the spiritual and political world of the Maya fractured, the physical cities that once stood as monuments to divine order began to collapse, one by one. These were not sudden implosions, but slow deaths, measured in silent plazas, abandoned altars, and crumbling stone. Archaeologists today read the ruins like physicians reading the bones of a fallen patient. Each site tells a unique story of stress, violence, and exhaustion. At Tikal, once a beacon of power and splendor, construction stopped abruptly. Temples meant to rise to the heavens were left unfinished. Inscriptions cease mid-dynasty, and stelae, those stone markers of royal lineage and triumph, vanish from the landscape. This pattern is repeated across the southern lowlands. At Copan, once a jewel of architecture and cosmology, the elite attempted one last grand flourish, the hieroglyphic stairway. But even as it was being constructed, the city was running out of resources. Soil erosion, failed crops, and dwindling labor forced the once great metropolis to turn inward. And then, silence. Copan's final recorded ruler disappears without mention, and the city's ceremonial heart is abandoned. Palenque follows suit, and then Quirigua, Bonampak, Yaxchilan, all great names in Maya grandeur, reduced to empty corridors and the slow, creeping vines of the jungle. But not all cities fell the same way. Some were destroyed by enemy forces, burned, defaced, their kings captured or executed. Others suffered internal collapse as nobles fought each other for power and resources. In some cities, mass graves reveal the marks of violence, skulls pierced by obsidian blades, bodies thrown into pits without ceremony. Elsewhere, signs of famine, malnourished skeletons, children with bone deformities, abrupt halts in building projects, show a slower, more agonizing death. The collapse was not uniform because the Maya world was not unified. Each city was its own kingdom, its own rise, its own fall. Environmental stress played a cruel hand in the decline. Prolonged droughts, beginning in the late 8th century, devastated already overworked agricultural systems. The Maya had once thrived by mastering their environment, constructing terraced hillsides, vast reservoirs, and intricate canal systems. But warfare disrupted maintenance. Labor was redirected toward military campaigns and royal projects, not food production. Deforestation, exacerbated by temple building and burning practices, stripped the land of its resilience. Without forests, rainfall patterns shifted, crops failed, and famine spread. These ecological signals, captured in lake sediment, tree rings, and cave stalagmites, confirm what the cities whisper in ruins. The land itself turned against them. Meanwhile, the lower classes, artisans, farmers, traders, began leaving en masse. With war above and famine below, survival meant escape. Villages in peripheral regions grew as central cities emptied. The Maya elite, starved of labor and tribute, became powerless. Temples were abandoned not because the gods had died, but because the people had walked away. It was a collapse not of buildings but of belief. The cities were left to rot, not conquered but discarded. What's most striking is the absence of resistance in these final days. There are few signs of rebellion, few recorded battles or desperate last stands. Instead, we see quiet exits. The Maya people did not vanish. They migrated, transformed, and adapted. But the political and ceremonial core of their civilization, the sacred city-states, ceased to function. And so, stone by stone, the jungle took back what had once been divine. Even in death, the cities told stories. At Karakol, researchers found that after centuries of growth, its final construction projects were smaller, hurried, and sloppier. Monument texts reused older stones, signs of economic strain. At Dos Pilas, hastily built fortifications hint at a final stand that never succeeded. At Aguateca, an enemy attack seems to have forced elite residents to flee so suddenly they left behind tools, jewelry, and unfinished meals. These archaeological freeze frames show moments of panic, abandonment, and loss. They are the echo of a society unraveling, and yet not all was lost. In the north, the cities of Chichen Itza and Uxmal continued to flourish for a time. These cities adopted new styles, merging traditions from central Mexico and the Gulf Coast. Their rulers built with innovation, combining religious devotion with military discipline. The famed Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza reflects a newer, more calculating cosmology, less ornate, more geometric, more austere. Here, the gods still ruled, but their voices were quieter, more distant. While southern cities fell to ruin, the north carried the torch for another century or more. Eventually, however, even these centers would fade. Political infighting, economic strain, and the same environmental challenges caught up with them. When the Spanish arrived in the early 1500s, the Maya were no longer a unified people, but a collection of small communities, each guarding pieces of a shattered legacy. Still, they resisted. The conquest of the Maya was not swift. It took nearly 170 years for the Spanish to fully subjugate the region, facing fierce resistance in places like Tayasal and Nojpeten. The spirit of the ancient cities, though buried, still burned in their descendants. The legacy of the Maya collapse challenges modern assumptions. It wasn't caused by a single invasion or a sudden cataclysm. It was the cumulative weight of centuries: war, betrayal, environmental degradation, spiritual exhaustion, and political fragility. The fall came not with a bang, but with a whisper, a slow, irreversible unraveling. And in that silence, we find one of history's most haunting lessons: greatness, no matter how divine, is fragile. Though the cities fell, the story of the Maya did not end. Beneath the collapsed temples and abandoned plazas, something more enduring survived: culture. The Maya people, their languages, their customs, and their memories did not vanish into the dust. Instead, they flowed like an underground river, winding silently through time until they surfaced again in new forms. What the archaeologists find in stone, the Maya descendants carry in their blood. In this resilience lies a deeper truth. Though empires fall, people persist. Across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador, millions of people today still identify as Maya. They speak over 30 distinct Mayan languages, each a thread connecting them to ancestors who once walked beneath the shadow of towering pyramids. Their rituals, though transformed by history, retain the spiritual framework of their forebears. In villages hidden in highlands or along forested rivers, the Maya still honor the land, the sun, the rain, and the sacred cycles of time. Archaeology has helped recover much of this lost world. With the decipherment of Maya hieroglyphs in the late 20th century, scholars began reading what the stones had long whispered. They uncovered the names of kings, the dates of battles, the reasons for war, and the triumphs and tragedies of entire dynasties. The stories once frozen in glyphs became living history again. Places like Copan, Tikal, and Palenque were no longer just ruins. They were biographies in stone, testimonies to both glory and ruin. But archaeology also tells us about survival. In the ashes of collapsed cities, researchers found modest homes where families continued to live even after the elite had fled. In some places, sacred objects were buried, not lost, but hidden, protected from invaders or returning rulers. These were not the acts of a defeated people. They were choices made to preserve what mattered most. Even as the political order crumbled, communities found ways to continue their traditions underground. This cultural continuity can also be seen in the Maya calendar system, particularly the Tzolkin, a 260-day sacred calendar still used in parts of Guatemala for agricultural and ceremonial planning. The calendar reflects a cyclical view of time that shaped every aspect of Maya life. In the classic period, rulers timed wars and rituals according to celestial events. Today, spiritual leaders called daykeepers consult those same calendars to guide births, weddings, and communal decisions. It is one of the longest continuously used timekeeping systems in the world. a clock that survived war, betrayal, drought, and conquest. Maya resistance to colonization is another chapter in this long story of resilience. The Spanish conquest of the Yucatan was one of the longest and bloodiest in the Americas. Unlike the Aztec and Inca empires, which had central rulers that could be captured or killed to break resistance, the decentralized nature of the Maya world made conquest difficult. Guerrilla warfare, strategic retreats, and spiritual defiance allowed many communities to resist for over a century. Some, like the Itza of Tayasal, held out until 1697, long after the rest of Mesoamerica had fallen. Even after military conquest, resistance continued in the form of cultural survival. In the face of forced conversion, land theft, and systemic repression, Maya communities preserved their beliefs in syncretic form. They adopted Catholic saints as stand-ins for old gods, incorporated Christian holidays into their own seasonal festivals, and used Spanish in public while speaking their native tongues at home. What looked like submission was often camouflage. Beneath the surface, the old ways endured. Maya activism continues in new forms. Across Guatemala and southern Mexico, Maya leaders campaign for land rights, environmental protection, language preservation, and political recognition. They honor their past not with nostalgia, but with urgency, seeking to restore the dignity denied to their ancestors. Cultural centers teach children how to read glyphs, plant ancestral crops, and understand the myths once carved in limestone. Elders recount oral histories passed down through generations, offering not just memory, but guidance. The modern world has begun to listen. Museums, universities, and governments are slowly recognizing the Maya not just as subjects of history, but as partners in shaping the future. New archaeological discoveries are now made in collaboration with local communities. Ancient texts are translated not only into English or Spanish, but back into Quiche, Yucatec, and Quechua. The Maya are no longer silent ruins, they are storytellers, scholars, and keepers of a legacy still unfolding. But even in this renewal, the shadow of the past lingers. The Maya wars, the betrayals, the collapse, they are more than history. They are warnings. They remind us that no civilization, no matter how divine its rulers or advanced its knowledge, is immune to the rot of ambition and internal decay. The Maya remind us that power without unity is brittle, that conquest without wisdom is poison, and that forgetting the past is the first step toward repeating it. The fall of the Maya Empire was not marked by the clang of enemy swords or the sudden silence of a conquered people. It was slower. It came in seasons of drought, in endless cycles of war, in whispered betrayals and desperate rituals. It was written not just in the glyphs carved into stone, but in the spaces between them, in the gaps where names disappear, where cities go silent, and where dynasties end with no heir to claim the throne. It is a history that doesn't end in fire, but in forgetting. Yet, within that silence, there are echoes, and those echoes have something to teach us. The Maya Wars were a mirror of humanity's greatest contradiction, our capacity to create and our compulsion to destroy. The same minds that mapped the stars, charted Venus, and built temples aligned with the cosmos also plotted assassinations, forged false alliances, and sacrificed their own kin for fleeting glory. The same civilization that developed one of the most sophisticated writing systems in the pre-modern world used it to inscribe victories over their own neighbors, rather than unify against external threats. They raised pyramids to honor the gods, then defaced those of their enemies. They believed in a sacred cosmic order, and yet their kings constantly pulled that order down around them. But these contradictions are not unique to the Maya. They are universal. Every empire that has risen, Rome, the Ming dynasty, the Ottoman Empire, even modern nations, has carried within it the seeds of its own decline. The Maya simply show us that those seeds often lie in division, in ego, in the betrayal of common purpose. When loyalty to power outweighs loyalty to people, when ritual becomes performance, and when rulers serve the gods of ambition rather than the gods of truth, collapse becomes inevitable. And yet, collapse is not the end. What the Maya teach us is that civilizations can die, but cultures can live. The people who once built pyramids now build classrooms. The languages that once echoed through royal courts now echo in markets, in homes, in lullabies. The wisdom of the Maya did not vanish. It transformed. It adapted. It hid when it needed to, and returned when the world was ready. The temples may be ruins, but the civilization is not. We must also consider what we owe to the Maya, not just as scholars or visitors to their ruins, but as inheritors of their warning. We live in a time of ecological strain, political polarization, and rising inequality. Dynamics the Maya knew well. They overused their resources. We do too. They fought endless internal wars while ignoring existential threats. So do we. They worshipped order, but fell to chaos born from within. We must ask, are we listening to history, or are we repeating it? The story of the Maya wars is more than a tragic tale of blood and betrayal. It is a reflection of the cost of forgetting who we are, mentioned to serve. The rulers forgot the people. The cities forgot the land. The rituals forgot the spirit. And in that forgetting, they lost everything. But their descendants remind us it is not too late to remember. Look at the resilience of the Maya today, not as a relic, but as a triumph. Against every odd, their identity survived. They still celebrate the solstices, still weave the patterns of the stars into their clothing, still honor the cycles of time that once shaped an empire. In every thread of a hupil, in every syllable of quiche, in every footstep on ancient stone, the Maya live. And in them we see that survival is not only possible, it is powerful. If there is one final lesson from the Maya wars, it is this. Greatness is not measured by how high we build or how far we conquer. It is measured by what we preserve, who we protect, and how we remember. Empires rise and fall, but wisdom, if we listen, can endure forever. So now, we turn to you. What do you take from the fall of the Maya? What lessons from their collapse echo in our world today? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your reflections, your insights, your questions. Because history, after all, is not just something we study. It's something we live. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to check out another interesting video.